History classes never taught you this secret. Ancient Scandinavian warriors created their most lethal blades from marshy sludge. Their techniques remain astonishing, even by today's standards. In the frozen territories of the north, where each day meant battling for existence, these seafaring raiders crafted armaments that entered legend. They possessed no underground mines, no advanced smelting facilities. Their primary metal source? Murky wetlands and rust-colored brooks. Scandinavian metalworkers mastered the art of converting humble marsh deposits and submerged minerals into weapons of extraordinary power and elegance. This transformation balanced technical mastery, relentless labor, and what some considered supernatural forces. It demanded profound knowledge of natural elements and flame manipulation. This tells the tale of how lethal steel emerged from wetland muck, how persistence and expertise triumphed over raw material limitations. Stay until the conclusion to discover why marsh metal proved simultaneously a burden and gift for craftsmen, and which hidden component made northern blades both flexible and razor-sharp. Imagine learning that the most devastating weapons of this era originated not from mountain veins, but from simple bog sludge. This isn't poetry, it's the brutal truth of Nordic artisans. The foundation for their famed armaments was termed swamp or marsh iron. This material consisted of porous deposits forming beneath marshlands, waterways, and riverside plains. Across generations, countless iron-concentrating bacteria extracted dissolved metal from water, creating solid ore nodules. For Norse smiths, these humble stones represented genuine wealth. Unlike cliff face ore requiring excavation, marsh iron rested within easy reach. It could be gathered from shallow depths by probing with extended poles or dragging it from lake beds. Notice how the surface gleams, young one. That marks where metal sleeps. It was self-renewing. Fresh deposits materialized within mere decades. The gathering itself was grueling, filthy labor. Workers stood in frigid currents for extended periods, systematically surveying bottoms. Discovered ore resembled corroded, irregular sponges packed with mud and plant matter. Initially, it seemed impossible this substance could yield anything valuable. It crumbled easily, carried impurities, and held relatively minimal pure iron. Yet it possessed one critical benefit that northerners exploited brilliantly. Marsh iron contained substantial phosphorus, a naturally occurring alloy element. Properly refined, this phosphorus enhanced metal rigidity. It was nature's formula that craftsmen uncovered through experimentation. This is how we achieve perfect flatness. Watch carefully. The concept of transforming mud into deadly weaponry seems fantastical. This metallurgical alchemy required not merely strength, but generations of accumulated wisdom. Every phase, from gathering to shaping, carried danger and exhausting effort. Collected ore was stacked in massive piles along shorelines to dry. It needed several months exposed to air, eliminating excess dampness. Only then could its initial metamorphosis into metal commence. Vikings saw no separation between craft and mysticism. To them, both were unified aspects of one process. Converting stone into steel was holy ritual, demanding reverence for fire and earth elements. This perspective enabled them to produce extraordinary works. We'd appreciate your thoughts. What's your perspective on such an unconventional metal source for weaponry? Share your views below and subscribe to the channel to catch every new story. Are you prepared to uncover the reality about the first blazing phase of ore transformation? After marsh ore was gathered and dried, it couldn't enter the smelting chamber immediately. It still contained excessive clay, sediment, and organic contamination, which hindered the procedure. To purify ore, Vikings employed a technique called calcination. They constructed a massive timber fire at ground level. When flames burned intensely, they cautiously layered dried ore atop it. Then another timber layer, repeating several times, forming a stratified structure. This enormous blaze had to burn multiple hours. Extreme heat incinerated all organic content, vaporized lingering dampness, and rendered ore more breakable. During calcination, ore chunks shifted color from brownish to deep crimson or ebony. After flames extinguished and temperatures dropped, calcinated ore broke apart easily. It was shattered into fragments roughly walnut-sized using mallets. This ensured that hot vapors in the smelting chamber could circulate uniformly through ore layers, guaranteeing superior iron extraction. Without even crushing, you won't achieve the ideal smelting we require. This phase was absolutely vital. Skipping calcination meant either complete smelting failure or extremely contaminated metal with excessive waste. It was grimy, smoke-filled, yet entirely essential labor. Preparation itself consumed enormous resources, chiefly timber. Scandinavian woodlands provided everything needed, but lumber harvesting was separate, back-breaking work. Each stage required collaborative effort and substantial time investment from communities. After crushing, ore was ready for the most crucial stage, smelting. For this, Vikings constructed specialized chambers, which formed the core of all metallurgical production. These seemingly elementary structures resulted from centuries of practice and trial. This chamber, a monument to ancestral wisdom, contains generations of understanding within its stones. Building and operating such chambers required specialized expertise. Chamber locations were selected deliberately, typically near water sources and sheltered from powerful winds. The entire smelting success hinged directly on proper chamber architecture. And observe here how the updraft from the chamber draws heat downward. Thus, the journey from marshy lump to smelting-ready material was extensive and demanding. It required patience, physical power, and comprehension of materials' concealed characteristics. This was the initial but hardly final step in the grand transformation. Magnificent! How challenging do you believe maintaining steady fire temperature was for uniform ore roasting? In the upcoming segment, we'll expose the central mystery of Viking metalworking mastery, which continues amazing historians. It demands patience and particular fortitude, not only in your muscles, but in your spirit. What you're about to discover was concealed knowledge, only revealed through contemporary investigation. The greatest Norse swords, like the legendary Ulfbert, weren't fashioned from singular steel pieces. Their blades were intricate composite constructions created using pattern welding methodology. This technique represented the zenith of metalworking during that period. The craftsman took multiple metal strips with varying carbon levels, soft, low-carbon iron and hard, high-carbon steel. It was merging these two substances that gave blades their distinctive characteristics. Metal strips were heated in chambers to welding temperatures and fused together using forging methods, hammering them into singular rods. These rods were then reheated and twisted along their axes like cordage. Twist quantity and direction depended on desired designs. After twisting, rods were flattened again. Frequently, 2 or more twisted rods were welded together, creating even more intricate designs. This procedure repeated numerous times until the master obtained the central portion of the future blade. This central blade core was simultaneously strong and elastic. Soft iron layers prevented blade fracturing under severe impact, functioning as shock absorbers. Hard steel layers provided necessary structural rigidity. The blacksmith welded blades of purest, hardest steel to this patterned core. It was delicate work requiring incredible accuracy. The tiniest error would destroy days of labor. The secret to excellent blades lies not simply in heat, but in patience and hand precision. After welding and giving blades their final shapes, they were ground and acid treated. Acid affected varying carbon metals differently. Consequently, intricate, beautiful designs resembling waves or braided cords emerged on surface wood. This design wasn't merely decoration, but a quality certification. It clearly showcased work complexity and master's supreme skill. Such swords were not only formidable weapons, but status symbols, genuine artistic masterpieces. Pattern welding methodology required not only physical strength from blacksmiths, but also intuitive metal sense. He had to judge temperature visually and feel when metal was welding ready. This was knowledge beyond book description. It was such swords that made Viking-era weaponsmiths renowned. They weren't magic results, but highest technological skill, perfected to excellence. Each blade was material manifestation of its creator's experience and talent. Estimate how many trees required felling to forge one sword. The answer might astonish you. The entire procedure from ore roasting to blade forging required massive charcoal amounts, not ordinary firewood. Charcoal was the sole fuel capable of reaching temperatures necessary for iron smelting. It burns hotter and more uniformly than timber and contains virtually no contaminants like sulfur that could corrupt metal. Therefore, charcoal production was separate and essential industry. Obtaining charcoal was prolonged and laborious. Timber, usually hardwood, was tightly stacked into large mounds called kilns. These mounds were covered with turf and soil layers, leaving only small apertures for smoke escape and air entry. Then, timber inside mounds was ignited. The charcoal burner's responsibility was preventing timber from burning completely. He had to regulate the slow smoldering procedure for multiple days or even weeks, controlling air supply with dampness. As a result of this pyrolysis or oxygen-free burning, timber converted into pure carbon charcoal. This procedure required tremendous experience and vigilance. Excessive air and the entire mound would burn to ash, insufficient, and the procedure would halt. Calculations show that 4 to 10 kilograms of charcoal were required, producing 1 kilogram of iron, and obtaining charcoal in turn necessitated burning several times more timber. Producing 1 kilogram sword could require felling several dozen mature trees. This means metallurgy was among the primary factors influencing landscapes. Around large settlements where smithing was actively practiced, forests could be cleared for many kilometers. This forced people seeking new timber sources or relocating production. We should expand charcoal production further into those forests there. I agree, we need more for winter. Charcoal was strategic resource no less important than ore itself. Control over woodlands and charcoal production gave enormous advantages. Without this black porous fuel, all Viking metallurgy would have been impossible. Every blacksmith needed steady supplies of quality charcoal. Blacksmith workshops and smelting facilities were often positioned directly in forests closer to fuel sources. This reduced costs of transporting heavy and fragile charcoal. How much do you think such industrial activity impacted the environment then? In the next segment, you'll learn how Vikings built their primitive blast chambers in which dirt was converted into metal. At the center of the entire metallurgical procedure was the smelting chamber, or bloomery. It was simple but effective construction that Vikings built from readily available materials. The success of the entire enterprise depended on its proper building and operation. The chamber was a vertical shaft constructed of clay mixed with straw or grass for reinforcement. Walls were made sufficiently thick to withstand extreme temperatures. Often chambers were additionally lined with stones for strength and superior heat retention. Such chamber height usually didn't exceed 1.5 meters. Inner chamber diameter was approximately 30 to 40 centimeters. A chamber too large would require excessive coal and effort maintaining temperature, while one too small would be unproductive. An opening was left at chamber bottoms to release slag, molten contaminants from ore. There was also a nozzle or tuyere at bottoms, through which air was fed into chambers. The tuyere was made with fired clay as it had to endure direct contact with hot coals. Air supply was a key element of the procedure. Large leather bellows were used for this purpose, which had to be pumped manually throughout the smelting procedure. This monotonous but vital labor required great physical endurance. Before starting smelting procedures, chambers had to be preheated. Fire was lit inside, which burned for multiple hours, drying clay walls and preparing chambers for operation. Only then could fuel and ore be loaded. Building and maintaining such chambers required specialized knowledge. Craftsmen knew exactly what clay to use and how to correctly mix it with reinforcing materials. These secrets were transmitted from father to son. This seemingly simple design was the result of centuries of experimentation. It was perfectly adapted to available resources and materials. It was in this clay heart that the main mystery occurred, the birth of iron. Are you ready for the shocking reality about what was actually extracted from smelting chambers? It wasn't liquid metal as in modern blast facilities. The wet smelting procedure produced lumpy, spongy iron pieces, saturated with slag, which was called bloom. The smelting procedure began with loading charcoals into preheated chambers. When coal burned to desired temperatures, the master began alternately pouring crushed ore and coal layers. Bellows worked continuously, pumping air into chambers and maintaining heat. Temperatures inside chambers reached approximately 1200 degrees Celsius. This temperature was sufficient to reduce iron from oxides, but not to melt it. The iron in chambers never turned into liquid state. At the same time, the empty rock contained in ore melted, forming liquid slag. This slag flowed to chamber bottoms and was removed through special openings. It carried away most harmful contaminants, purifying future iron. Reduced iron particles settled in chambers, fusing together into single porous masses. The entire smelting procedure could take from multiple hours to a full day depending on chamber size and ore quality. All this time, several people had to work bellows non-stop and add fuel. When the master decided the procedure was complete, bellows were stopped. Chambers were allowed cooling slightly, after which front walls were dismantled. Using long tongs, blacksmiths extracted blooms from red-hot interiors of chambers. this was the climax, and most spectacular moment. The white-hot bloom iron weighed several kilograms and looked like large, shapeless pieces of metal and slag. Sparks flew from it, and it glowed with unearthly light in the twilight of the forge. What kind of physical effort do you think it took working bellows all day long? In the next segment, you'll learn how shapeless pieces of red-hot sponge were turned into strong, uniform metal. Immediately after being removed from chambers, red-hot blooms were placed on anvils. One of the most difficult and noisy stages began: primary forging. The blacksmith's task was compacting porous metal and squeezing out remaining liquid slag. Multiple people working with large hammers began methodically striking ingots from all sides. With each blow, fountains of fiery sparks flew out of red-hot masses. This was the slag. The work required coordination and precise rhythm. This procedure was similar to squeezing water from sponges. Gradually, blow after blow, porous and fragile material became denser and more homogeneous. Blacksmiths had to constantly turn blooms to work on them from all sides. During forging procedures, ingots cooled down and had to be sent back to forges again and again to be reheated. Work progressed slowly. It could take multiple hours to turn one ingot into dense metal bars. During this procedure, significant weight amounts were lost. Sometimes up to half of original bloom weight was lost to slag. This was inevitable but necessary procedure, purifying and compacting metal. The result was so-called wrought steel, blanks ready for further forging. It was still heterogeneous in chemical composition. Different parts had different carbon contents. It was this heterogeneity that was key to pattern welding methodology. Experienced blacksmiths could roughly determine metal properties by its color and how it responded to processing. He selected softer and harder pieces to later combine them into single blades. Pure iron obtained from blooms was too soft to make good blades. It bent easily and quickly became dull. To make it hard, it had to be turned into steel that is saturated with carbon. Vikings didn't have modern steel production methods. They used a procedure called cementation or carbonization. This procedure took place directly in forges, which were heated with charcoal. Blacksmiths repeatedly heated iron blanks in the hottest parts of forges, in the thick of hot coals. At high temperatures, iron surfaces actively absorbed carbon from fuel. This procedure was slow and required great skill. To speed up and make carbonization more uniform, blacksmiths used methods of repeated forging and folding. Were heated, forged into thin plates, then folded in half and welded again with blacksmith welding. This procedure was repeated dozens and sometimes hundreds of times. Each folding doubled the number of layers in blanks. At the same time, carbon absorbed from surfaces was distributed throughout entire metal volumes. In addition, this procedure made metal structure more homogeneous and removed slag residues. Experienced masters could control carbon content by changing temperatures in furnaces and holding times. This was intuitive knowledge based on years of experience. He judged metal readiness by heat color and how it sparkled when struck. Soft, low-carbon core for resilience and hard, high-carbon steel for sharp edges. Blacksmiths often deliberately created blanks with different carbon contents. Softer, low-carbon metal was used to make blade cores for elasticity. Hard, high-carbon steel obtained through long cementation procedures was used to make cutting edges. This procedure transformed simple iron into steel with specific properties. Like sculptors, blacksmiths molded not only shape, but also internal structure of their future blades. Weapon combat qualities depended directly on this stage. After blades were completely forged and polished, the most critical and risky stage began: heat treatment. It was this stage that transformed steel pieces into real weapons. The slightest mistake at this stage would instantly destroy weeks of painstaking work. Heat treatment consisted of two main procedures: hardening and tempering. Hardening was necessary to make steel as hard as possible. To do this, blades were heated evenly to certain temperatures, which masters determined by heat color, usually cherry red color. Then red-hot blades had to be cooled very quickly. It was immersed in large containers of water, oil, or even snow. Sudden cooling changed internal crystal structure of steel, making it extremely hard, but also very brittle. This moment was pure magic and lottery. If blades were heated unevenly or had internal defects, they could crack or warp right in the middle of hardening procedures. Historians believe the percentage of rejects at this stage was very high, even for experienced craftsmen. After hardening, blades became as hard as glass and just as brittle. If someone tried to strike with it, it would most likely shatter into pieces. To relieve internal stresses and give metal necessary toughness and elasticity, a second stage was required: tempering. For tempering, hardened blades were heated again, but to much lower temperatures, around 200 degrees Celsius. At this temperature, so-called temper colors appeared on polished steel surfaces, ranging from light straw to blue. Craftsmen used these colors to judge temperature and degree of tempering. Once desired colors were achieved, blades were cooled again. Tempering made steel slightly less hard, but significantly more durable and elastic. It's this balance of hardness and toughness that's the main characteristic of quality metal. Tempering isn't just about heat, it's about finding that perfect balance, that sweet spot where metal is strong yet flexible. Now, blades were ready. They were hard enough to hold edges and elastic enough not to break in battle. All that remained was bringing them to perfection. Finished blades were still far from being called swords. Long and painstaking finishing procedures began. First, blades were carefully ground with abrasive stones of varying grit, moistened with water. Grinding removed traces of forging and hardening, leveled surfaces, and formed perfectly smooth bevels to blades. This procedure could take multiple days. It was during grinding that hidden patterns began appearing on surfaces of blades made using pattern welding methodology. Grinding was followed by polishing. This was done using leather and abrasive powders, such as crushed sandstone or clay. Polishing not only gave blades mirror-like shine, but also protected them from corrosion. Then it was time for sharpening. Blades were carefully sharpened on fine-grained wet stones to razor sharpness. Proper sharpening was no less important than quality steel. Weapon penetrating ability depended on it. In parallel with work on blades, another craftsman, and sometimes blacksmiths themselves, made parts of hilts: the guard, handle, and pommel. Guards and pommels were most often made of iron or bronze, and could be decorated with intricate ornamentation or inlays of precious metals. Handles were made of wood, bone, or horn. It was carefully fitted to blade tangs to ensure secure and comfortable grip. Handles were often wrapped with leather or wire for better grip. When all parts were ready, sword assembly began. Guards, handles, and pommels were sequentially placed on blade tangs. Then tang ends were riveted over pommels, firmly pulling entire structures together into single holes. This marked the end of long journeys that began in swamps. From unremarkable rusty mud, through fire, water, and hundreds of thousands of hammer blows, weaponry masterpieces were born. The Viking sword was ready for battle. We've traced the entire incredible journey of creating Viking swords. From collecting ore at swamp bottoms to final blade polishing, this procedure was true miracle of engineering, patience, and hard work. It required craftsmen to have deep, intuitive understanding of materials and elements. Vikings proved that rich deposits and complex technologies aren't always necessary to create perfect weapons. Sometimes all you need is what lies literally beneath your feet, as well as knowledge passed down from generation to generation. Their swords aren't just weapons, but monuments to human ingenuity and willpower. Which stage of this procedure do you think was most difficult and required greatest skill? Suggest topics for future videos that you'd like to see on our channel in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss out on new research into historical technologies.